Hello everyone, and welcome to lesson 1 of fundamentals of information system security. So in this lesson we have a few objectives that we want to cover. The first one is we want to be able to explain information system security and its effect on people and businesses. Some of the key concepts we'll cover are information system security concepts, the CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the 7 domains of an IT infrastructure, the weakest link in the security of an IT infrastructure, and IT security policy framework and data classification standards. Let's begin by looking at information system security. So today the internet is a worldwide network that has over 3 billion users in it. And it includes almost every government, business, and organization that we have on Earth today. However, having that many users on the same network wouldn't solely have been enough to make the internet a game-changing innovation. These users needed some type of mechanisms to link documents and resources across computers. In other words, a user on computer A needed an easy way to open a document on computer B. This need gave rise to a system that defines how documents and resources are related across network machines. The name of this system that we need is called the World Wide Web. You see it as WWW. You also may know it as cyberspace or simply as the web. The web is the connection of websites, web pages, and digital content on those network computers. Cyberspace is all the accessible users, networks, web pages, and applications working in this worldwide electronic realm. Let's take a quick look at some recent data breaches, some examples that we have. One we have is Adobe Systems Incorporated in 2013. Basically, hackers published data for 150 million accounts. They also stole encrypted customer credit card data, and they compromised logon credentials. The second one is the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, which happened in 2015. This data breach impacted 22 million people. They stole social security numbers, names, places of birth, and addresses. And millions of people have to monitor their accounts for identity theft for many years to come. In your text, there are also some other major breaches that occurred, including Blue Cross Blue Shield and Target. Unfortunately, when you connect to cyberspace, you also open the door to a lot of bad guys. They want to find you and they want to steal your data. Every computer or device that connects to the internet is at risk, creating an Internet of Things that supports users in all aspects of their lives. Like outer space, the maturing internet is a new frontier. There's no internet government or central authority. It's full of challenges and it's full of questionable behavior. This questionable behavior is evident given the data breaches we've seen in the past 3 years alone. In the United States, public and private sectors have been compromised through unauthorized access and data breach attacks. These recent attacks have been committed by individuals, by organized crime groups, and attackers from other nations. The quantity of cyber attacks on U.S. interests is increasing every single day. You can just pick up any newspaper and you'll see that. With the Internet of Things now connecting personal devices, home devices, and vehicles to the internet, there are even more data to steal. All users have to defend their information from attackers. Cybersecurity, which is what you're getting into, is the duty of every government that wants to ensure its national security. Data security is the responsibility of every organization that needs to protect its information assets and sensitive data, like social security cards, credit card numbers, and things like that. And it's the job of all of us to protect our own data. This slide before you illustrates this new frontier that we're now dealing with. The components that make up cyberspace are not automatically secure. These components include cabling, physical networks, operating systems, and software applications that computers use to connect to the internet. At the heart of the problem is the lack of security in what we call the Transmission Control Protocol or an Internet Protocol, which is TCP/IP. This is a communications protocol that most of us use when we're online using the internet. This protocol is the language that computers use most commonly to communicate across the internet. Now, a protocol is a list of rules and methods for communicating. TCP/IP is not just one protocol, but a suite of protocols developed for communicating across the network. Named after the two most important protocols, TCP/IP works together to allow any two computers to communicate. Connecting two or more computers creates what's called a network. TCP/IP breaks messages into chunks or packets to send data between these network computers. The problem lies in the fact that Data are readable within each IP packet using simple software available to anybody. This readable mode is known as clear text. That means you must hide or encrypt the data sent inside a TCP/IP packet to make the data more secure. All this raises the question, if the internet is so unsafe, why did everybody connect to it so readily? And the answer is that the huge growth of the web from the mid-1990s to the early 2000s. Connecting to the internet gave everybody instant access to the web and its many resources. The appeal of easy worldwide connectivity drove the demand for everybody to connect. This demand and subsequent growth helped drive costs lower for high-speed communications. Households, businesses, and governments gained affordable high-speed internet access. And as wireless and cellular connections have become more common and affordable, it has become easier to stay connected no matter where you are and what devices you need to connect. This slide shows how the Internet of Things is making the world a digitally connected place. The Internet of Things magnifies the risk, threat, and vulnerability issues, given that a hacker or attacker can gain unauthorized access to any IP-connected device. Once access to an IP-connected device is granted, data can be stolen or damage can be done if the attacker desires. It's this dark villain nature of a hacker that helped label hackers as black hats. Internet growth has also been driven by generational changes. Generation Y's culture is taken over as baby boomers begin to retire. This new generation grew up with cell phones, smartphones, and always-on internet access. These devices provide real-time communication. Today's personal communication include voice over IP, text messaging, instant messaging, and chatting, as well as audio and video conferencing. These real-time session initiation protocol enabled, or SIP enabled it's called, applications are commonly known as unified communications. Examples of unified communication applications include things like Google Chat, instant messaging service, Yahoo Messenger, WebEx, GoToMeeting, and Skype for business online meeting features. Meanwhile, an information security war is raging. The battlefield is cyberspace and the enemies are already within the gates. To make matters worse, the enemy is everywhere, both in the local area and around the world. The enemy seeks your sensitive data. Therefore, the name of the game for an attacker is to gain unauthorized access. Unauthorized access means that the attacker obtains your authorized login ID and password without your permission. Using those logon credentials, the attacker gains access to the same systems and applications that your access permits. If unauthorized access is granted, then depending on that user's access controls, sensitive data may be accessible and can be downloaded. For this reason, information technology infrastructures need proper security protocols and controls. This information security war has created a great demand for information systems security and information assurance professionals, for a new kind of cyber warrior to help defend security and business interests. Let's take a look at risks, threats, and vulnerabilities. First, there's risk. Risk is the likelihood that something bad is going to happen to the asset. It is the level of exposure to some event that has an effect on an asset. In the context of IT security, an asset can be a computer, a database, or a piece of information. Examples of risk include losing data, losing business because a disaster has destroyed your building, or failing to comply with laws and regulations. A threat is any action that could damage an asset. Information systems face both natural and human-induced threats. The threats of flood, earthquake, or severe storms require organizations to create plans to ensure that business operation continues and that the organization can recover. A vulnerability is a weakness that allows a threat to be realized or to have an effect on an asset. To understand what a vulnerability is, think about lighting a fire. Lighting a fire is not necessarily bad. If you are cooking a meal on a grill, you will need to light a fire in that grill. The grill is designed to contain the fire and should pose no danger if used properly. But on the other hand, lighting a fire in a computer data center will likely cause damage. A grill is not vulnerable to fire, but a computer data center is. A threat by itself does not always cause damage. There must be a vulnerability for a threat to be realized. Vulnerabilities can often result in legal liabilities also. Any vulnerability that allows a threat to be realized may result in legal action. Let's take a look at what information system security is. The term security is easiest to define by breaking it into pieces. An information system consists of the hardware, operating system, and application software that work together to collect, process, and store data for individuals and organizations. Therefore, information system security is the collection of activities that protect the information system and the data stored in it. Many U.S. and international laws now require this kind of security assurance. Organizations, therefore, must address this need head on. Now we move to U.S. compliance laws and how they drive need for information system security. Cyberspace brings new threats to people and organizations. People need to protect their privacy. Businesses and organizations are responsible for protecting both their intellectual property and any personal or private data they handle. Various laws require organizations to use security controls to protect private and confidential data. Let's look at some of the U.S. laws related to information security. The first one we start with on the slide is the CIPA/FERPA. Let's start with CIPA. CIPA stands for Children's Internet Protection Act. And it was passed in 2000 and it was updated in 2011. CIPA requires public schools and public libraries to use an internet safety policy. The policy has to address certain criteria, and you can find that in your textbook on page 13. FERPA is also related to education. It is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And it was passed in 1974, and it protects the private data of students and their school records. Next we have FISMA. FISMA is the Federal Information Security Management Act. It was passed in 2002, and it requires federal civilian agencies to provide security controls over resources that support federal operations. There's also another FISMA called the Federal Information Security Modernization Act instead of Management Act. This was passed in 2014, and it was enacted to update FISMA 2002 with information on modern threats as well as security controls and best practices. Next is the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or SOX. It was passed in 2002, and it requires publicly traded companies to submit accurate and reliable financial reporting. This law does not require securing private information, but it does require security controls to protect the confidentiality and integrity of the reporting itself. Next is HIPAA, which stands for Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It was passed in 1996, and it requires healthcare organizations to have security and privacy controls implemented to ensure patient privacy. Next is the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, and it was passed in 1999, and it requires all types of financial institutions to protect customers' private financial information. Finally is PCI DSS, and PCI DSS is the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, and it's a global standard, not a U.S. federal law, that requires protection of consumer privacy data with proper security controls. There are 3 tenets that make up all information security systems. These 3 tenets are confidentiality, which means only authorized users can view information, integrity, which means only authorized users can change information, and availability, where information is accessible by authorized users whenever they request the information. When you design and use security controls, you're addressing one or more of these tenets. When you're looking for solutions to security issues, you must use the CIA triad. You have to define your organization's security baseline goals using the triad for a typical IT infrastructure. Once defined, these goals will translate into security controls and requirements based on the type of data that you're protecting. Let's look at each one of the CIA triad components in more detail. First, confidentiality is a common term. It means guarding information from everyone except those with rights to it. Confidential information includes the following: private data of individuals, intellectual property of business, and national security for countries and governments. U.S. compliance laws that protect citizens' private data require businesses and organizations to have proper security controls in place to ensure confidentiality. Be sure to look at page 16 for more on confidentiality. Sending data to other computers using a network means you have to take special steps to keep confidential data from unauthorized users. Cryptography is the practice of hiding data and keeping it away from unauthorized users. Encryption is the process of transforming data from clear text into ciphertext. Clear text data are data that everyone can read. Ciphertext is the scrambled data that are the result of encrypting clear text. Data privacy is so important that local and state governments are starting to pass laws to protect it by extending the federal laws. This slide depicts how clear text is changed to ciphertext using a VPN tunnel with encryption abilities enabled. Next is integrity. Integrity deals with the validity and accuracy of data. Data lacking integrity, that is, data that are not accurate or not valid, are of no use. For some organizations, data and information are intellectual property assets. Examples include copyrights, patents, secret formulas, and customer databases. This information can have great value. Unauthorized changes can undermine the data's value. This is why integrity is a tenet of system security. This slide demonstrates what is meant by data integrity and whether that data are usable. Sabotage and corruption of data integrity are serious threats to an organization, especially if the data are critical to business operations. Availability is a common term in everyday life. For example, you probably pay attention to the availability of your internet service, your TV service, or your cell phone service. In the context of information security, availability is generally expressed as the amount of time users can use a system, application, and data. Some common availability time measurements include the following. You have uptime, which is the amount of total time that a system, application, or data are accessible. Downtime, which is the total amount of time that a system, application, and data are not accessible. Availability, mean time to failure, which is the average amount of time between failures for a particular system. Mean time to repair, which is the average amount of time it takes to repair a system, application, or component. Mean time between failures, which is the predicted amount of time between failures of an IT system during operation. And recovery time objective, which is the amount of time it takes to recover and make a system, application, and data available for use after an outage. So what role do the three tenets of system security play in a typical IT infrastructure? First, let's review what a typical IT infrastructure looks like. Whether it's a small business, large government body, or publicly traded corporation, most IT infrastructures consist of 7 domains, which you see on the slide before you. You have your user, you have your workstation, you have your local area network, you have your local area to wide area network, you have your wide area network, remote access, and system application domains. A typical IT infrastructure usually has these 7 domains. Each one requires proper security controls, and these controls must meet the requirements of the CIA triad. Let's do an overview of the 7 domains and the risks, threats, and vulnerabilities you'll commonly find in today's IT environments. First is the user domain. The user domain defines people who access an organization's information system. The user domain has roles, responsibilities, and accountability. So let's start by looking at roles and tasks. Users can access systems, applications, and data depending upon their defined access rights, and employees must conform to the staff manual and policies that the organization has set in place. The user domain is where you will find what's called an acceptable use policy, and that acceptable use policy defines what users are allowed and not allowed to do with organization-owned IT assets. It's kind of like a rule book that employees must follow. Violations of those rules can be grounds for dismissal. This is where the first layer of defense starts for a layered security strategy. Next are responsibilities. Employees are responsible for the use of IT assets. New legislation means that for most organizations, it's the best practice to introduce an acceptable use policy. Organizations may require staff, contractors, and other third parties to sign an agreement to keep information confidential. Finally, you have accountability. Typically, an organization's human resources department is accountable for implementing proper employee background checks. These should be performed for individuals who will be accessing sensitive data. Some common threats found in the user domain are lack of user awareness, user apathy toward policies, users violating security policy, user inserting a CD or a USB with personal files on it, user downloading photos, music, or videos, user destructing systems, applications, and data, disgruntled employee attacking organization or committing sabotage, and employee blackmail or extortion. You can learn more about each of these in your book on page 21. Next is your workstation domain. A workstation can be a desktop computer, a laptop computer, a special purpose terminal, or any other device that connects to your network. Workstation computers are generally what's called thin clients or thick clients. A thin client is a software or an actual computer with no hard drive that runs on a network and relies on a server to provide all its applications, data, and all its processing. Thin clients are usually used in large organizations, libraries, and schools. In contrast, a thick client is more fully featured hardware that contains a hard drive and applications and processes data locally, going to the server mainly for file storage. An ordinary PC that you might have at home is an example of a thick client. Let's look at workstation domain roles, responsibilities, and accountabilities. First, you have roles and tasks. An organization's staff should have the access necessary to be productive. Tasks include configuring hardware, hardening systems, and verifying antivirus files. The workstation domain needs additional layers of defense, which is a tactic that we call defense in depth. Responsibilities. An organization's desktop support group is responsible for the workstation domain. Enforcing defined standards is critical to ensuring the integrity of user workstations and data. The IT security personnel must safeguard controls within the workstation domain. And finally, there's accountability. An organization's IT desktop manager is typically accountable for allowing employees the greatest use of the workstation domain. The director of IT security is generally in charge of ensuring that the workstation domain conforms to policy. Some common threats found in the workstation domain is unauthorized workstation access, unauthorized access to systems, applications, and data, desktop or laptop operating system vulnerabilities, desktop or laptop application software vulnerabilities or patches, viruses, malicious code, and other malware, user inserting CD, DVD, or USB with personal files on it, and user downloading photos, music, or videos. Again, you can find more information on these in your book on page 23. Now we move to the LAN domain and its roles and responsibilities. A local area network, also known as a LAN, is a collection of computers connected to one another or to a common connection medium. Network connection mediums can include wires, fiber optic cables, or radio waves. LANs are generally organized by function or department. Once connected, your computer can access systems, applications, possibly the internet, and data. Let's look at the roles and responsibilities for the LAN. First, you have roles and tasks. The LAN domain includes both physical network components and logical configuration of service for users. Management of the physical components include cabling, NIC cards, LAN switches, wireless access points, and a variety of other things. Next are responsibilities. The LAN support group is in charge of the LAN domain. This includes both the physical component and the logical components. LAN system administrators must maintain and support departments' files and print services and configure access control for users. Next, we have accountability. The LAN manager's duty is to maximize use and integrity of data within the LAN domain. Typically, the director of IT security must ensure that the LAN domain conforms to policy. Common threats include unauthorized physical access to the LAN, unauthorized access to system applications and data, LAN server operating system vulnerabilities, LAN server application software vulnerabilities and software patch updates, rogue users on wireless LANs, confidentiality of data on wireless LANs, and LAN server configuration guidelines and standards. Let's move to the LAN to WAN domain. The LAN to WAN domain is where the IT infrastructure links to a wide area network and the internet. Unfortunately, connecting to the internet is like rolling out the red carpet for the bad guys. The internet is open, public, and easily accessible by anybody. Most internet traffic is clear text. That means it's visible and is not private. Network applications use two common transport protocols. We talked about TCP/IP, so the first one is Transmission Control Protocol, and the second one is called UDP, or User Data Protocol. Both TCP and UDP use port numbers to identify the application or the function. And these port numbers function like channels on a TV, dictating which station you're going to be watching. When a packet is sent via TCP or UDP, its port numbers appears in the packet header. Because many services are associated with a common port number, knowing the port number essentially reveals what type of packet it is. This is like advertising to the world what you're transmitting. Let's take a look at the roles and tasks and responsibilities and accountability. The LAN to WAN domain includes both the physical pieces and the logical design of security appliances. It is one of the most complex areas to secure within an IT infrastructure. You need to maintain security while giving users as much access as possible. Physical parts need to be managed to give easy access to the service. The security appliances must be logically configured to adhere to policy definitions. This will get the most out of availability, ensure data integrity, and maintain confidentiality. For responsibilities, the network security group is responsible for the LAN to WAN domain. This includes both the physical components and logical components. Group members are responsible for applying the defined security controls. And for accountability, your organization's WAN network manager has a duty to manage the LAN WAN domain. Typically, the Director of IT Security ensures that the LAN to WAN domain security policies, standards, procedures, and guidelines are used. Common threats include unauthorized probing and port scanning, unauthorized access, IP router, firewall, and network appliance operating system vulnerability, download of unknown file type attachments from unknown sources, and unknown email attachments and embedded URL links received by local users. Learn more about each of these in your book. Now we talk about wide area network domains, and these connect to remote locations. As network costs drop, organizations can afford faster internet and WAN connections. For the roles and tasks, the WAN domain includes both physical components and the logical design of routers and communication equipment. It is the second most complex area to secure within an IT infrastructure. Your goal is to allow users the most access possible while making sure what goes in and out is safe. For responsibilities, the network engineer or WAN group is responsible for the WAN domain. This includes both the physical components and logical elements. Network engineers and security practitioners set up the defined security controls according to defined policies. For accountability, your organization's IT network manager must maintain, update, and provide technical support for the WAN domain. Typically, the Director of IT Security ensures that the company meets WAN domain security policies, standards, procedures, and guidelines. Some common threats include open, public, and accessible data, most traffic being sent in clear text, vulnerability to eavesdropping, malicious attacks, denial of service attacks, and corruption of information and data. Also, insecure TCP/IP applications. Some other ones include commingling of WAN IP traffic on the same service provider router, maintaining high WAN service availability, using SNMP network management applications and protocols like ICMP, Telnet, DNS, and SNMP, and SNMP alarms and security monitoring 24/7 by 365 days a year. Next is remote access domain. The remote access domain connects remote users to the organization's IT infrastructure. Remote access is critical for staff members who work in the field or from home. For example, outside sales reps, technical support specialists, or healthcare professionals. Global access makes it easy to connect to the internet, email, and other business applications anywhere you can find a wireless fidelity or Wi-Fi hotspot. The remote access domain is important to have, but is dangerous to use because it introduces many risks and threats from the internet. For roles and tasks, the remote access domain connects mobile users to their IT systems through the public internet. The mobile user must have a remote IP device able to connect to the internet. Besides laptop computers, mobile users can use smartphones, tablets, and PDAs as handheld computers. The mobile software on these devices makes possible phone calls, voicemail, email, text messaging, and web browsing remotely. For responsibilities, the network engineer or WAN group is usually in charge of the remote access domain. This includes both the hardware components and the logical elements. For accountability, your organization's WAN network manager is accountable for the remote access domain. Typically, the Director of IT Security must ensure that the remote access domain security plans, standards, methods, and guidelines are used. Common threats include brute force attacks, multiple login retries, unauthorized remote access to IT system application and data, confidential data being compromised remotely, and data leakage in violation of data classification standards. Now we look at system and application domain. This domain holds all the mission-critical systems, applications, and data. Authorized users may have access to many components in this domain. Secure access may require second-level checks. As far as roles and tasks, the system application domain consists of hardware, operating system software, applications, and data. This domain includes hardware and its logical design. An organization's mission-critical application and intellectual property assets are stored here. So therefore, it must be secure both physically and logically. For responsibilities, the responsibility for system application domain lies with the Director of Systems and Applications and the Director of Software Development. For accountability, the Directors of System and Applications and Software Development are accountable for the organization's production systems and users. Typically, the Director of IT Security is accountable for ensuring that the system application domain security policies, standards, procedures, and guidelines are in compliance. Some common threats are unauthorized access, downtime of servers, server operating system vulnerability, insecure cloud computing, corrupt or lost data, and loss of backup data as backup media are reused. Let's take a look at the weakest link in IT security of IT infrastructure. Basically, you, the user, is the weakest link in security. Even information system security practitioners, like us, can make mistakes. Human error is a major risk and threat to any organization. No group can completely control any person's behavior. For these reasons, every organization must be prepared for malicious users, untrained users, and careless users. Here are some strategies you can use to reduce risk. Check background of each job candidate carefully. Give each staff member a regular evaluation. Rotate access to sensitive systems, applications, and data among different staff positions. Apply sound application and software testing and review for quality. Regularly review security plans throughout the 7 domains of the typical system. And perform annual security control audits. To build a respected and effective profession, information system security professionals like us must operate ethically and comply with a code of conduct. This slide explains why this tenet is the basis of the profession. So let's look at ethics on the internet. So imagine if there were no air traffic controllers and airplanes flew freely. Trying to take off and land would be extremely dangerous. There'd probably be more accidents. Such a situation would wreak havoc on our society. Incredibly, cyberspace has no authorities that function like air traffic controllers. To make matters worse, human behavior online often is less mature than in normal social settings. Cyberspace has become the new playground for today's bad guys. This is why the demand for system security professionals is growing so rapidly. The U.S. government and the Internet Architecture Board, which is IAB, has defined a policy regarding acceptable use of the Internet geared towards U.S. citizens. It is not a law or a mandate, however, because cyberspace is global and entirely without borders. This policy cannot be enforced. Its use is based on common sense and personal integrity. Ethics are a matter of personal integrity. The system security profession is about doing what is right and stopping what is wrong. Let's take a look at the IT security framework. So cyberspace cannot continue to flourish without some assurances of user security. Several laws now require organizations to keep personal data private. Businesses cannot operate effectively on an internet where anyone can steal their data. IT security is crucial to any organization's ability to survive. This slide introduces you to an IT security policy framework, and the framework consists of policies, standards, procedures, and guidelines that reduce risks and threats. Basically, a policy is a short written statement that the people in charge of an organization have set as a course of action or direction. It comes from upper management and applies to the entire organization. A standard is a detailed written definition for hardware and software and how they are to be used. Standards ensure that consistent security controls are used throughout the IT system. Procedures are written instructions for how to use policies and standards. They may include a plan of action, installation, testing, and auditing for security controls. And finally, a guideline is a suggested course of action for using the policy, standards, or procedures. Guidelines can be specific or flexible regarding their use. This slide is an example of the hierarchical IT security policy framework. Policies apply to an entire organization. Standards are specific to a given policy. Procedures and guidelines help define the use of it. Within each policy and standard, identify the impact for the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure. This will help define the roles, responsibilities, and accountability throughout. Let's look at some foundational IT security policies. The focus of your organization's IT security policy framework is to reduce your exposure to risks, threats, and vulnerabilities. It's important to relate policy definition and standards to practical design requirements. These requirements will properly apply the best security controls and countermeasures. Policy statements must set limits as well as refer to standards, procedures, and guidelines. Policies define how security controls and countermeasures must be used to comply with laws and regulations. Here are some of the foundational IT security policies. I'm not going to go through each one of them. You can read these in your book. But you have acceptable use policy, security awareness, asset classification, asset protection, asset management, vulnerability assessment and management, and threat assessment and monitoring. Next, we examine data classification standards. The goal and objective of a data classification standard is to provide a consistent definition for how an organization should handle and secure different types of data. Security controls protect different data types. These security controls are within the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure. Procedures and guidelines must define how to handle data within the 7 domains of a typical IT infrastructure to ensure data security. For businesses and organizations under recent compliance laws, data classification standards typically include the following major categories. We have private data. This is data about people that must be private. Organizations must use proper security controls to be in compliance. Next is confidential. Information or data owned by the organization is confidential information. Intellectual property, customer lists, pricing information, and patents are examples of confidential data. Internal use only. This is information or data shared internally by an organization. Although confidential information or data may not be included, communications are not intended to leave the organization. And finally, public domain data. This is information or data shared with the public, such as website content, white papers, and things like that. Depending on your organization's data classification standard, you may need to encrypt data of the highest sensitivity, even in storage devices and hard drives. Users may also be restricted from getting to private data of customers and may be able to access only certain pieces of data. So in summary, this lesson has introduced information systems security in the system security profession. You saw a common definition for a typical IT infrastructure. You learn about risks, threats, and vulnerabilities within the 7 domains. Each of these domains require the use of strategies to reduce risks, threats, and vulnerabilities. You saw how IT security policy frameworks can help organizations reduce risk by defining authoritative policies. You also learned that data classification standards provide organizations with a roadmap for ways to handle different types of data. But who is going to implement the security controls? Well, qualified IT security professionals are required to design and implement the appropriate security controls and countermeasures. As an IT security professional, you must have the highest human integrity and ethics. There are several professional security certifications available for you to obtain, like CompTIA Security Plus and the CISSP. That's it for this lesson, and I'll see you in the next lesson.